A man driven insane by intense desire to control, manipulate, and kill led one of the most horrific serial killing sprees of his time. Today we discuss the Candyman, Dean Corll. Let's open the serial killer file. Dean Arnold Corll was born on Christmas Eve 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the oldest of two sons. His parents, Mary Robinson and Arnold Corll, had a tumultuous relationship. Arnold was a strict disciplinarian while Mary was extremely protective of Dean. The pair fought constantly, resulting in divorce in 1946. Following their first divorce, Mary Corll moved with the children to Memphis, Tennessee when Arnold was drafted into the Air Force, trying to keep her sons close to their father. Eventually, Dean's parents reconciled and remarried in 1950, moving to Pasadena, Texas, but eventually divorced for a second time in 1953. 2 years later, Mary remarried a traveling clock salesman named Jake West and gave birth to daughter Joyce, settling in Vidor, Texas. The couple started a candy company together called Pecan Prince, where Dean and his younger brother Stanley worked day and night during their school years. Dean was a quiet, empathetic child but had bouts of illness in his early years. At age 7, he contracted rheumatic fever, which went untreated until doctors detected he had a heart murmur at the age of 11, a diagnosis that excused him from physical education classes. During his high school years, he was known as a well-behaved but solitary student who achieved modest grades. Upon graduating in 1958, he moved with his family to Houston to expand their business, but just 2 years later, Dean moved in with his widowed grandmother in Indiana. He began a relationship with a young woman who proposed to him in 1962, but Dean rejected her and moved back to Texas to help with his family's business. His mother divorced his stepfather the following year, renaming the company to Corll Candy Company and appointing Dean vice president. Later that year, Mary fired a teenage employee who complained Dean was making sexual advances toward him. Despite his heart condition, Dean was drafted into the Army in August of 1964 and was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana for basic training. He later trained at Fort Benning in Georgia as a radio repairman and was permanently assigned to Fort Hood, Texas. During his time in the military, he had his first openly homosexual encounters. Despite an impeccable record, Dean hated the military and sought to return to the family business. He was honorably discharged from service on June 11, 1965, and returned to working for the Candy Company. The family business had moved to Houston Heights, where Dean became known as the Candyman and the Pied Piper, due to his habit of providing candy to the children in the area. He was also known to flirt with many of his teenage male employees. Eventually, the family business shut down in 1968 when Dean's mother and half-sister moved to Colorado, leading him to take a job as an electrician. Dean met 12-year-old David Brooks in 1967. David came from a broken home and bounced between his parents. He quickly became attached to Dean, looking to him as a father figure, and visited him when David traveled from his mother's home in Beaumont, Texas, to Houston. 2 years into their friendship, Dean groomed David into sexual relationship, exchanging cash or gifts for oral sex. Dean began his heinous murder spree in 1970, exploiting his hold over 15-year-old David to his advantage. When David walked in on him assaulting 2 teenage boys in his apartment that year, Dean bribed him into silence, offering to buy him a car. Later, he would end up paying him to help lure in victims. His first victim was 18-year-old Jeffrey Cohen. Jeffrey, a college freshman, disappeared while hitchhiking home from the University of Texas in Austin. Police suspected Dean and David picked Jeffrey up from Houston, took him to Dean's apartment where he was abused, tortured, and strangled to death. Later, David helped lure 14-year-old James Glass and Danny Yates away from a nearby religious rally to the apartment, where they met their end at Dean's hands. Then, on January 30th, 1971, the duo kidnapped 15-year-old Donald and 13-year-old Jerry Waldrop while they walked home. Like the other victims, they were assaulted, tortured, and murdered, and had their bodies disposed of in one of Dean's dump sites. From March to May of 1971, Dean claimed the lives of 15-year-old Randall Harvey, 13-year-old David Hillegeist, and 16-year-old Gregory Winkle, all with the help of David Brooks. No one was off limits from Dean Corll's clutches, even David's friends, such as 17-year-old Reuben Watson Haney. David lured Reuben to Dean's apartment under the guise of attending a party, but he was subsequently strangled and disposed of. In the fall of 1971, David lured two unknown young boys to the apartment, each separately held alive for 4 days before their murders. Their identities are still unknown. Towards the end of 1971, David introduced Elmer Wayne Henley to Dean, likely with the intent of having him become their latest victim. However, Dean took a liking to Wayne, a 15-year-old high school dropout from a broken home, and offered him work as a paid accomplice alongside David. Prior to becoming involved with Dean, Wayne had been close friends with two of Dean's victims, even helping their families put up flyers and searching for them. Wayne claimed he ignored and rebuked Dean's offers for months until he agreed to participate in what Dean called a white slavery ring. Wayne's first lured victim is believed to be 17-year-old Willard Branch Jr., who disappeared on February 9, 1972. Wayne claimed he was unaware of Dean's true intentions until the murder of 18-year-old Frank Aguirre, an accomplice of his. The pair were hanging out in Dean's apartment, drinking and smoking marijuana, when Dean took Frank hostage, handcuffing and gagging him. Wayne allegedly tried to persuade Dean to let him go, but Dean refused and revealed the evil acts he had committed thus far. Despite knowing this, Wayne continued to assist him, becoming more and more sadistic, according to David. The following month, David and Wayne helped Dean abduct 17-year-old Mark Scott, who put up a vicious fight and tried to stab his attackers, but gave up at gunpoint. A month later, during the abduction and assault of Johnny DeLome and Billy Balch, Wayne allegedly strangled Billy and shot Johnny in the head non-fatally. The only victim to be set free after being sexually assaulted and tortured was 19-year-old Billy Rittinger. During the summer of 1972, Dean kidnapped and killed 17-year-old Stephen Sickman and 19-year-old Roy Bunton. 2 months later, Wayne and David lured Wally J. Simoneau and Richard Hembry to the apartment, where they were held overnight before their deaths. Wally tried to call his mother, but only managed to shout "Mama" into the phone before it disconnected. The final victim of 1972 was 19-year-old Richard Kepner, who had disappeared on his way to use a phone booth on November 12th. January of 1973 saw the death of 17-year-old Joseph Lyles, David Brooks' neighbor. There was a brief lull in the killing when David fell ill and Wayne moved away for a short time, but it began after David recovered and Wayne returned. William Ray Lawrence was abducted by Dean and Wayne in June 1973 and tortured for 3 days before he was strangled to death. 2 weeks later, 20-year-old married father Ray Blackburn disappeared while hitchhiking from Houston to Baton Rouge. In July, Wayne met 15-year-old Homer Garcia at a driver's education school. Homer ended up dead, shot, and left to bleed to death in Dean's bathtub that night. Dean Corll's last 5 victims all fell within a 3-week period. 17-year-old John Sellers, 15-year-old Michael Balch, the older brother of a former victim, Billy Balch, 18-year-old Marty Jones, 17-year-old Charles Cobb, and 13-year-old James Dramala on August 3rd. All 5 victims were bound, assaulted, tortured, and strangled to death. The final straw for Wayne came on August 8, 1973. Wayne, now 17, brought over their next victim, 19-year-old Timothy Curley, but 15-year-old Rhonda Williams tagged along. Dean did not want a girl in his home. Infuriated, he waited until the teenagers fell asleep before he bound and gagged all three. Wayne convinced Dean to free him so he could participate in torturing Timothy and Rhonda. As Dean began torturing Timothy, Rhonda asked Wayne, "Is this for real?" To which he replied that it was. Rhonda then asked him, "Are you going to do anything about it?" Wayne Henley had had enough. Grabbing Dean's .20 caliber pistol, he demanded him to stop. Dean was unfazed, egging him on, saying, "You won't do it." Wayne fired at him 6 times, once in the forehead, twice in the shoulder, and 3 more times as he slid down against a wall in the hallway. Dean Corll was dead. Wayne was arrested, and while in custody, he detailed how he and David Brooks assisted Dean Corll in raping, murdering, and disposing of victims over 3 years. Police were skeptical, but upon hearing the names of some of the missing boys, they believed him. A search of Dean's home revealed a plywood torture board he used to restrain his victims, as well as sex toys, handcuffs, and a large knife. Dean's van contained rope, hooks, and a wooden crate with air holes drilled into it. A second wooden crate was found in Dean's backyard, along with another torture board. Supplies to aid in disposing bodies were found at a cabin owned by the Corll family. David Brooks initially denied involvement, but later gave a full confession. Both Wayne and David led police to the bodies. All victims were found buried, 17 in a boat shed in southwest Houston, 4 at Lake Sam Rayburn, 6 at High Island Beach, and 1 at Jefferson County Beach. The body of Mark Scott was never located. Most of the victims were identified by April of 1974. However, it took until 2008 to correctly identify them all. Dean Corll is suspected of numerous other homicides and disappearances in the Houston area. Wayne and David Brooks were tried separately for their roles in the murders, both defenses arguing that they had not directly killed anyone and that they were unwilling assistants. David Brooks was found guilty for the murder of William Lawrence on March 4, 1975, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Wayne's first trial found him guilty of 6 counts of murder, and he was sentenced to 6 consecutive 99-year sentences. He requested a retrial but was found guilty of all 6 murders again on June 27, 1979, with the same sentence. Both men are currently serving time in separate prisons in Texas. That's all for now. True crime and creepy content is being demonetized on YouTube, making it harder for me to create this content for you. If you would like to help fight this change and keep YouTube creepy, please consider pledging even $1 to my Patreon, linked in the description below. If even 5% of my audience did that, we could guarantee that true crime and creepy content would remain on YouTube. Thanks for your consideration. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out another one of my videos, and of course, press on screen to subscribe to my channel now, because you won't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.